Hester was a woman of remarkable beauty, born into a family of significant power and status. From the outside, she had everything one could ever wish for an esteemed lineage, a loving husband, and 3 beautiful children. Yet, despite her outward success, something was missing in her life, something deep and profound. Hester's marriage, once filled with the spark of young love, had gradually become dull and empty. She found herself drifting farther and farther from her husband, not out of any personal animosity, but because there was no true emotional connection left. The man she had once been in love with had become a mere stranger, and their home, which should have been a sanctuary of warmth, felt cold and hollow. Her relationship with her children, too, was complicated. While she had given birth to a son and 2 daughters, each of them adorable and full of potential, Hester could not bring herself to love them the way a mother should. She knew it, and yet she tried her best to pretend. She gave them toys, clothes, and everything material a child could wish for, but there was an emptiness in her heart that no material possession could fill. She went through the motions of motherhood, but inside she was a stranger to herself and her own children. The bond that was supposed to be unbreakable, the unspoken love that should have flowed naturally between a mother and her children, was absent in Hester's world. Every day felt like a repeat of the last. Her husband would leave for work early in the morning, commuting to the city where he held a job in an office, but he wasn't particularly successful at it. His earnings barely stretched to cover their growing expenses. Despite living in a fine house with beautiful gardens, their financial situation was deteriorating. The bills piled up, and the whispers of financial trouble loomed over them, an ever-present reminder of their instability. What troubled Hester the most, however, was her inability to change anything. She felt powerless, trapped in a life she hadn't anticipated, a life that seemed so far removed from the dream she had once had. The whispers in the house were not just a sound, but a constant reminder of her failures as a wife, as a mother, and as a woman. She wondered why she couldn't find the happiness and fulfillment that others seemed to have so easily. She questioned her own worth, and in that questioning, the emptiness inside her grew deeper. There was no peace, no joy, just the incessant yearning for something more, something that she couldn't quite put her finger on, but knew she desperately needed, despite living in a beautiful house, filled with expensive furniture, lush gardens, and every toy and material possession a child could dream of. Hester's family was struggling. Their financial situation was a constant source of tension in their home. Though they had the appearance of wealth, they were, in reality, deep in debt. Hester and her husband lived beyond their means, spending more money than they earned. Every month, the weight of their bills became heavier, and they found themselves sinking deeper into financial trouble. The house, that once felt like a symbol of success, now felt more like a prison, beautiful on the outside, but filled with a growing sense of dread on the inside. Hester's husband worked tirelessly in the city, commuting every day to a job in an office, but he wasn't successful. He didn't earn enough to support their lifestyle, and his inability to provide the financial security they needed only added to Hester's frustration. She, too, didn't know how to make money. She had no skills that could help them escape their situation. The money they had seemed to disappear almost as quickly as it arrived, and the pressure to maintain their expensive lifestyle only grew stronger. It felt like a never-ending cycle of spending and struggling to keep up appearances. The children, despite having all the toys they could want, were not immune to the tension in the house. They could sense the unease in the air, the underlying fear that they might lose everything. Hester's son, Paul, especially felt the weight of their financial struggles. He asked his mother why they were poor, and Hester's response was cold and bitter. She blamed their lack of success on bad luck, claiming that luck was more important than money. Paul, eager to make sense of the situation, became fixated on the idea that if they could somehow become lucky, their problems would disappear. He believed that luck could bring them the wealth they so desperately needed, even though he had no idea how it would happen. The house, despite its outward beauty, felt haunted by a constant whisper, "There must be more money. There must be more money." It wasn't a voice that anyone could hear clearly, but it was there, an ever-present murmur that seemed to follow them wherever they went. It was as if the house itself was alive, perpetually hungry for more. And with each passing day, the family found themselves further trapped in a web of debt and desire, unable to break free from the cycle of spending, hoping, and wishing for something better. Paul, Hester's son, was a curious boy, always searching for answers to the questions that seemed to plague their household. He couldn't understand why they were poor. Despite living in a beautiful home with all the toys and things that most children could only dream of, his mother, in her cold and bitter tone, explained that their misfortune was due to a lack of luck. She told Paul that luck was the key to wealth, and without it, they would never be able to escape their financial struggles. "Luck brings money," she said sharply, as though that was the simple, undeniable truth. To Paul, this made sense. He had never fully grasped the concept of wealth and success, but he understood luck. It was something intangible, something he couldn't see or touch, but something that seemed to control everything around them. If they could just be lucky, then they could be rich. This idea of luck took root in Paul's mind, growing stronger with each passing day. He began to believe that luck was a force, something he could control if he just tried hard enough. He was convinced that if he could find this luck, everything in their lives would change. The constant whispering in the house, the voice that seemed to say there must be more money, only fueled his desire to uncover this mysterious force. Paul's obsession with luck became all-consuming. He would spend hours sitting on his rocking horse, riding it wildly in search of the elusive thing he believed could change their lives. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like a simple game, but to Paul, it was serious. He wasn't just playing. He was searching for something he couldn't explain, something he thought would bring them the wealth they so desperately needed. Every day, Paul would sit on the rocking horse, staring at its red mouth and wide, glass eyes, convinced that it held the key to finding luck. He would whisper to the horse, asking it to take him to the place where luck could be found. He believed that the horse had a power beyond the ordinary, that somehow, through the frantic motion of the rocking, he could connect with a force that would make everything right. In his childlike innocence, Paul didn't realize how dangerous this obsession was becoming. He didn't understand that luck wasn't something you could force into existence, nor did he realize how deeply his search for it was affecting him. But in his mind, if he could just find luck, everything would fall into place, and the whispers in the house would finally stop. As Paul's obsession with luck grew stronger, his relationship with his uncle Oscar became more significant. Oscar, a man who had seen his fair share of life's ups and downs, took an interest in Paul's peculiar behavior. He was intrigued by the boy's belief that luck could change their financial fortunes, but he also found it odd that a child could be so fixated on something so abstract. When Oscar visited the family one afternoon and saw Paul riding his rocking horse with such intensity, he couldn't help but ask, "Hello, young jockey, is your horse going to win its race?" It was a simple question, one that seemed to amuse Oscar, but it made Paul even more determined to explain his strange belief. Paul, eager to prove that he wasn't just imagining things, responded quietly, "He doesn't have just one name. He has different names. He was called Sansovino last week." Oscar, surprised by the name, asked how Paul knew of it. Sansovino, he explained, was the name of a horse that had won a big race at Ascot, something that Paul couldn't have known unless someone had told him. But Paul insisted that the horse spoke to him, that the names and the winners of races were not coincidences, but signs of something bigger. Oscar, now genuinely curious, decided to take Paul under his wing. He recognized that Paul's knowledge of horse racing was more than just a coincidence, even if he couldn't understand how the boy seemed to know which horses would win. Oscar began taking Paul to see Bassett, the young gardener who worked for the family. Bassett, it turned out, had been involved in horse racing for years and had some knowledge of which horses were likely to win. But even Bassett was hesitant to reveal the full extent of Paul's insights. Paul, in turn, was secretive about how he knew the winners, speaking of his partnership with Bassett, though no one fully understood the details. One day, Oscar took Paul for a ride in his car, eager to know more. "Do you ever bet on the horses?" he asked. Paul hesitated before answering, but then said that he had placed a bet on Daffodil, a horse that was not expected to win, but Paul was certain would come in first. Oscar, skeptical but intrigued, asked how much money Paul was betting. £300, Paul replied seriously, surprising Oscar with the amount. "Where did you get that money?" Oscar asked, astonished. Paul explained that Bassett kept it for him, and that he and Bassett shared their winning. Oscar, though still unsure about how Paul seemed to know the outcomes, decided to place a bet on Daffodil himself. When Daffodil won, Paul's success seemed to confirm that he might have some special insight into the world of horse racing. From that point on, Oscar became more involved in Paul's bets, watching with growing interest as the boy's predictions continued to come true. But despite his growing fortune, Paul remained focused on one thing: finding the luck that would solve all their problems, and he began to believe that his relationship with luck was something much more powerful than he had ever imagined. Oscar, though initially skeptical, couldn't ignore the strange series of events surrounding Paul's newfound success in the world of horse racing. The boy's predictions, wild as they seemed, were coming true one after another. Oscar had seen his fair share of gamblers and lucky guesses, but something about Paul's confidence and the way he seemed to intuitively know which horses would win piqued his curiosity. After all, this was no ordinary child. Paul wasn't just placing bets like a regular gambler. There was something almost mystical about the way he spoke about the races, as if he had an unseen connection to some deeper force guiding him. At one point, Oscar's interest deepened when Paul confidently told him that Daffodil would win a particular race. Oscar, who had been hearing about the boy's predictions from Bassett, was still uncertain about how Paul knew what he knew. But he also couldn't ignore the fact that Daffodil, a horse that was considered a long shot, came in first. Oscar was both impressed and perplexed. How did Paul know? Was it pure instinct, or was there something more to this? Paul's certainty made Oscar even more intrigued. He found himself paying more attention to the boy, questioning him about his methods. But Paul remained elusive, rarely offering more than a simple, "I'm sure." Oscar began taking Paul to the racetrack, not just as an observer but as a participant. He wanted to see firsthand how Paul was making his picks. It wasn't long before Oscar realized that Paul wasn't just following the typical patterns or trends in horse racing. He was predicting outcomes with uncanny accuracy. One day, after a particularly successful bet, Paul excitedly told Oscar that he had £1,500 in winnings. He wanted to share it with Oscar, to make him a partner in his newfound fortune. The idea of partnering with the boy thrilled Oscar, who had become increasingly fascinated by the boy's predictions. Yet as Oscar listened to Paul's plan, something began to feel off. Despite his growing fascination with Paul's talent, Oscar noticed how Paul's obsession with luck was starting to consume him. The boy seemed fixated on the idea of finding the right horse, as if this would fix all the problems in his family's life. It became clear that Paul wasn't just betting for fun. He was driven by a deep, almost desperate need to prove that luck could solve everything. Oscar, though impressed by Paul's success, began to feel a sense of unease. He wondered how far Paul would go with this obsession. It wasn't just about horse racing anymore. It was about something much bigger, a belief in luck that seemed to have taken over the boy's every thought and action. Oscar, now deeply involved in Paul's life, couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility for the boy. He wanted to help Paul, but he was also unsure how much of this luck was truly under the boy's control. Was Paul just lucky, or was there something more mysterious at play? Regardless of the answer, Oscar found himself caught up in Paul's world, a world where winning was everything, and luck seemed to be the only answer to the family's struggles. As Paul's involvement in the world of horse racing deepened, so did his belief that his newfound success was not just a matter of chance, but the result of something greater. Paul's uncanny ability to predict the winners of races had astonished not only his uncle Oscar, but also the rest of the family, including Bassett, the family's gardener. The boy's confidence grew with each winning bet, and his relationship with Oscar transformed. No longer was Oscar just an interested bystander. He was now an active participant in Paul's growing betting scheme. The more Paul won, the more Oscar became convinced that there was something special about the boy's predictions. One day, after a particularly lucrative bet, Paul proudly announced that he had accumulated a staggering 1,500 pounds. His excitement was palpable, and he eagerly offered to share the wealth with Oscar, suggesting that they become partners in this venture. Oscar, though initially surprised by the sheer amount of money Paul had won, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The boy's success was undeniable, and Oscar, intrigued by the boy's apparent gift, decided to go along with the plan. He knew that in the world of horse racing, anything could happen, but Paul's seemingly flawless predictions made him a believer in the boy's luck. However, as the stakes grew higher, so did the pressure. Paul's obsession with the idea of luck, this unseen force that guided his every move, began to take a toll on him. The more money he made, the more desperate he became to keep his winning streak alive. It wasn't enough for Paul to just win. He needed to prove to himself and to his family that luck could solve all their problems. His mother, Hester, had always told him that they were poor because they lacked luck, and now, with each bet, Paul felt he was proving her right. But there was a darkness creeping into his obsession. The tipping point came when Paul confidently predicted that the horse Lively Spark would win an important race. This time, Paul didn't just bet a small amount. He went all in. He wagered a significant sum, 10,000 pounds, with the belief that his intuition was infallible. Oscar, though slightly wary of the large amount, was still trusting of Paul's predictions and joined him in the bet. When Lively Spark crossed the finish line in first place, Paul's winnings grew to an astonishing 10,000 pounds. It was clear now that Paul wasn't just lucky, he was on a winning streak that no one could deny. Yet, despite the mounting wealth, Paul's obsession with luck continued to overshadow everything else. His thoughts were no longer just about the races. They were consumed by the need to prove that luck could solve all of their financial problems. He became more withdrawn, his eyes wild with the pressure to keep winning. Oscar, while still fascinated by Paul's predictions, couldn't ignore the boy's growing anxiety. The money they were winning seemed to offer no relief, only intensifying Paul's need to keep playing the game. It was as if the more they won, the more the whispers of the house grew louder, calling out for more and more money. As Paul's winnings grew, so did his desperation. The money they were accumulating seemed like a solution. But with each victory, the whispers in the house grew louder, more insistent, almost demanding. The constant echo of there must be more money consumed him. Despite the large sums they now had, Paul wasn't satisfied. In fact, it became clear that the more money they won, the more Paul's obsession deepened. He was no longer just betting for the thrill of it or to solve his family's problems. He was betting because he believed that the more luck he found, the more it would prove his worth, his ability to fix everything that had gone wrong in his family's life. The financial burden, once so heavy, seemed to lessen with every win. But it was replaced by something more insidious, a gnawing emptiness that Paul didn't know how to fill. The truth, though, was that no amount of money could ever heal the deeper issues in Paul's life. It wasn't just about being lucky. It was about the unspoken void that existed within him and in his family. Paul's mother, Hester, was caught in her own web of dissatisfaction. The £5,000 they had received seemed to briefly placate her, but soon enough she was hungry for more. Her longing for material things and status, combined with Paul's obsession with proving that luck could fix everything, set them all on a dangerous path. The house, once filled with the promise of success and beauty, became a place of constant yearning. They had everything, but it was never enough. Paul's pursuit of luck, fueled by his belief that it could end their financial struggles, ultimately came at the cost of his well-being. It was only when he began losing money, when the bets no longer came through as surely as before, that the weight of his obsession began to crush him. The child who had once believed in luck as a force that could solve everything found himself overwhelmed, his body and mind breaking under the pressure. He had sought to end the whispers in the house, to silence the constant demand for more money, but in the process he lost himself. The boy who had once been so full of life and excitement now lay in a state of illness, consumed by the very thing he had believed would save them. In the end, the tragic lesson of Paul's story is clear. No amount of wealth, no matter how great, can fill the deeper emptiness that comes from unmet emotional needs and unresolved struggles. True fulfillment doesn't come from material gain or external success. It comes from healing relationships, self-awareness, and finding peace within. Paul's search for luck in the horse races mirrors a much larger truth sometimes. We can become so fixated on external solutions that we lose sight of the internal work that must be done. In our own lives, we may not be chasing luck on a rocking horse, but we often chase things, status, money, success, that promise to fix our problems. Yet, as Paul's story tragically shows, the key to lasting happiness is not in the things we accumulate, but in the peace we find when we learn to live with what truly matters.